Captain Hyun-woo sat in his command chair on the bridge of the UES Iron Dawn, watching the stars drift past through the main screen. Space was quiet today, which was how he liked it. The ship moved through the dark between systems, carrying supplies, to the new human colony on Kepler 442b. It was routine work, but someone had to do it. The bridge was small compared to the massive warships shown in old Earth movies. The Iron Dawn was a cargo hauler that had been fitted with some weapons and better engines when humanity started exploring beyond their solar system. 12 ships like this one made up Earth's entire deep space fleet. Not much compared to what other alien races had, but it was all humanity could afford. Hyun-woo took a sip of his coffee and checked the time. They would reach the colony in 6 hours. He was thinking about getting some sleep when the communications officer, Hye-jin, suddenly straightened in her chair. "Captain, I'm picking up something strange," she said, her fingers moving quickly over her controls. "It's a transmission, but not on any human frequency." "Pirates?" asked Commander Jinna from her station near the navigation console. She was Hyun-woo's second-in-command and always worried about threats to the ship. "I don't think so," Hye-jin replied, frowning at her screen. "The signal is very weak, and it's coming from outside our normal shipping lanes. Wait." She paused, listening to something through her headset. "Captain, this is definitely not human, but it's being transmitted on emergency frequencies." Hyun-woo set down his coffee and leaned forward. In the 3 years since humanity had developed faster than light travel, they had only made contact with 2 alien species. Both encounters had been peaceful, but cautious. The galaxy was a big place, and humans were still learning their place in it. "Can you clean up the signal?" he asked. Hye-jin worked for several minutes, adjusting frequencies and filtering out background noise. Slowly, a voice began to emerge from the static. It spoke in a language none of them recognized, but there was something unmistakable about the tone. Fear, desperation. "Get Lieutenant Dong-min up here," Hyun-woo ordered. "His translation software might be able to make sense of this." While they waited for the xenobiologist to arrive, the signal continued. Even without understanding the words, everyone on the bridge could hear the panic in the alien voice. Whoever was speaking was asking for help. Dong-min arrived a few minutes later, carrying his portable translation unit. He was young for a fleet officer, but he had a gift for understanding alien languages. He plugged his device into the communication system and started working. "The language structure is similar to what we encountered with the Centauri traders," he said, typing rapidly. "Give me a few minutes to build a basic translation matrix." The bridge fell silent except for the alien transmission and the quiet hum of ship systems. Hyun-woo found himself gripping the arms of his chair as he listened to the desperation in the voice. Finally, Dong-min looked up. "Got it," he said. "It's not perfect, but I can give you the basic meaning." He adjusted his headset and listened for a moment. "The speaker is calling themselves Villani. They're asking for help from anyone who can hear them. Their world, Vela Prime, is under attack." "Attack by who?" Jinna asked. Dong-min listened again. "Something called the Korath Empire. The transmission says they've been fighting for weeks, but their defenses are failing. They expect their world to fall within days." The bridge was quiet. Hyun-woo stared at the main screen, thinking. Vela Prime wasn't in any of Earth's star charts. It could be anywhere in this part of the galaxy. "Can we get a location on the source?" he asked Hye-jin. "Working on it now," she replied. "The signal is very weak, which means it's either very far away or being transmitted with limited power. She paused. Got it. The signal is coming from a system about 4 light years from here. If we changed course now, we could reach it in 18 hours. Jinnah moved closer to Hyunwoo's chair. Captain, we should think carefully about this. We don't know anything about this conflict. For all we know, these Vellani could be the aggressors. Hyunwoo knew she was right to be cautious. The Iron Dawn was just one ship with a crew of 43 people. If this Korath Empire was powerful enough to threaten an entire world, what could one human cargo ship do against them? Keep listening to the transmission, he told Dongmin. See if you can learn more about what's happening. Over the next hour, the picture became clearer. The Vellani seemed to be a peaceful species that had been attacked without warning. The Korath Empire had a reputation for conquering weaker races and forcing them into slavery. Several other species had already fallen to them in recent years. They're not asking for military help, Dongmin reported. They're just asking for someone to remember them, to tell the galaxy what happened here. The words hit Hyunwoo like a punch to the gut. These people were facing extinction, and all they wanted was for someone to witness their end, to make sure they weren't forgotten. Jinnah pulled him aside. Captain, I understand how you feel, but we have to be realistic. We're one ship against what sounds like an entire empire. Even if we wanted to help, what could we do? Hyunwoo looked around the bridge at his crew. They were good people, all of them. They had signed up to explore the galaxy and represent humanity among the stars. But they weren't soldiers. Most of them had never seen real combat. Hyejin, can you open a channel to Earth Fleet Command? He asked. At this distance, it would take 6 hours for a message to reach Earth and another 6 for a reply, she said. The Vellani might not have that long. Hyunwoo closed his eyes and thought about his daughter back on Earth. She was 7 years old and believed her father was a hero exploring the galaxy. What would she think if she knew he had turned away when people needed help? He thought about Earth's history. How many times had his ancestors cried out for help while others looked away? How many civilizations had fallen because no one was willing to stand up to bullies and tyrants? Set course for Vela Prime, he said quietly. Jinnah stared at him. Captain, are you sure about this? Contact the other ships in our convoy, Hyunwoo continued. Tell them what we've learned. Any ship that wants to return to Earth has my permission. But I'm not going to let these people die alone. The next few hours were tense, as Hyunwoo explained the situation to the other ship captains. 3 ships decided to continue to the colony. 9 others, including the Iron Dawn, changed course for Vela Prime. As they traveled through hyperspace, Dongmin continued monitoring the Vellani transmissions. The situation was getting worse. The Korath fleet was massive, easily 1,000 ships or more. They had already destroyed the Vellani's orbital defenses and were beginning to bomb the surface. Captain, Dongmin said during one of their briefings, I should tell you something about human military doctrine that might be relevant. What's that? According to the alien databases we've accessed, most galactic species follow very formal rules of warfare. Battles are planned carefully, with lots of communication between opposing sides. They're almost polite about it. And humans? Jinnah asked. Dongmin smiled grimly. Humans aren't polite. As they approached the Vela system, Hyunwoo gathered his crew one final time. I won't lie to you, he said. We're probably going to die. But sometimes dying for something is better than living for nothing. These Vellani people asked for help, and we're going to give it to them. The Iron Dawn and her sister ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Vela system. Ahead of them, A blue-green world hung in space, surrounded by the dark shapes of enemy vessels. The Korath Empire was about to learn what happened when you threatened innocent people in front of humans. The war was about to begin. Admiral Thexvar stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the final bombardment of Vela Prime through the main viewing screen. The planet's last city was burning, and the Velani resistance was almost broken. Soon, another world would belong to the Korath Empire. He was a tall creature by Korath standards, nearly 6 feet in height, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes adapted for the dim light of his homeworld. Like all Korath, he moved carefully in the ship's artificial gravity, which was set higher than what his species preferred to accommodate captured aliens who would work as slaves. Supreme Admiral, his communications officer reported, "We're detecting hyperspace signatures at the edge of the system." 9. "No. 10 small vessels are approaching." Thexvar barely looked up from his tactical display. "Velani reinforcements?" "No, sir. The energy signatures are completely unknown. The computer cannot identify the ship designs." This was mildly interesting. Thexvar walked over to the sensor station and examined the readings himself. The approaching ships were indeed small, roughly the size of Korath patrol vessels. Their technology seemed primitive compared to the advanced systems of the Empire. "Any response to our warning signals?" he asked. "None, sir. They're maintaining course and speed directly toward the planet." Thexvar considered this. In his 3 decades of military service, he had conquered 17 different species across 3 star systems. Most alien races followed similar patterns. When facing the might of the Korath Empire, first they would try to negotiate, then they would surrender, then they would beg. A few brave species would fight, but they always followed proper military protocol, announcing their intentions and demanding single combat between champions. "Send a message to the unknown vessels," he ordered. "Tell them they are entering Korath space and must surrender immediately or be destroyed." While his communications officer sent the message, Thexvar reviewed the tactical situation. His fleet consisted of nearly 1,000 ships, ranging from massive battle cruisers to fast attack vessels. The Korath military doctrine was simple: overwhelming numerical superiority combined with superior technology. It had never failed them. The unknown ships continued their approach without responding to the surrender demand. This was unusual, but not particularly concerning. Thexvar had dealt with stubborn aliens before. "Sir," the sensor operator reported, "the alien vessels are accelerating. They're moving much faster than their size should allow." Thexvar frowned. The ships were indeed moving at impressive speed, but speed alone would not help them against 1,000 Korath vessels. He activated his personal communication system and contacted the other fleet commanders. "All ships, unknown alien vessels are approaching. Prepare to intercept and capture if possible. We may have discovered a new species to add to the Empire." On the UES Iron Dawn, Captain Hyunwoo studied the massive enemy fleet through his own sensors. The Korath ships were arranged in perfect geometric formations around Vela Prime, just like the military textbooks said they would be. Lieutenant Dongmin had been right about alien warfare being polite and formal. "How many ships are we looking at?" asked Commander Jinnah from her position at the tactical station. "Computer counts 947 vessels," replied Chief Petty Officer Tae Ho from the pilot station. "Most of them are much larger than our ships." Hyunwoo nodded. He had expected something like this. The Korath Empire hadn't conquered multiple star systems by being weak, but human military thinking had developed differently than alien warfare. Earth's history was full of small forces defeating larger ones through superior tactics, surprise, and sheer determination. "Jinnah, what do you think about their formation?" he asked. She studied the enemy positions on her screen. They're arranged for maximum firepower coverage, but they're not expecting an attack from multiple directions. Look at how they're positioned. Every ship knows exactly where every other ship is supposed to be. Which means they're not used to fighting an enemy that doesn't follow their rules, Hyun-woo concluded. "Tae-ho, can our ships handle the kind of maneuvers we used in the Sol system war games?" Tae-ho grinned. "These ships are built for asteroid mining in high-gravity fields, Captain. They can take a lot more stress than anything these aliens have probably seen." Dongmin looked up from his xenobiology console. "Captain, I've been analyzing the Korath ship designs based on our sensor readings. Their hulls are optimized for low-gravity environments. Their home world probably has less than half of Earth's gravity." "What does that mean for us?" Jinnah asked. "It means their ships and their crew can't handle the kind of acceleration and impact forces that we consider normal," Dongmin explained. "A maneuver that would be routine for us might literally tear their ships apart." Hyun-woo felt a cold smile cross his face. Humanity had evolved on what galactic scientists classified as a deathworld, a planet so hostile that most alien species couldn't survive there for more than a few hours. Earth's high gravity, violent weather, aggressive ecosystem, and unstable geology had forced humans to become adaptable, tough, and creative. "Engineering, this is the captain. So Young, are you listening?" "Yes, sir," came the reply from the chief engineer. "I've been monitoring your conversation. I can boost our acceleration by 30% and increase shield power, but the Korath ships will tear apart if they try to match us. Do it, and prepare the ramming charges." There was a pause. "Sir, did you say ramming charges?" "You heard me. If we're going to do this, we're going to do it the human way." Across the human fleet, similar conversations were taking place. Captain Hanuel of the UES Stormchaser was reviewing attack patterns with her crew. Captain Woo Jin of the UES Relentless was checking his ship's improvised weapon systems. Captain Yuna of the UES Defiant was coordinating with her navigation team for high-speed combat maneuvers. None of the human ships were originally designed for warfare, but they had been modified with human ingenuity and Earth military thinking. Where other species built specialized warships, humans had learned to turn anything into a weapon. Admiral Thexvar watched with growing concern as the alien ships approached his outer perimeter. They were moving in a formation he didn't recognize, and their acceleration was far higher than anything he had seen from vessels of their size. "Sir, the lead vessel is broadcasting something," his communications officer reported. "Put it on speakers." A voice filled the command deck, speaking in a language the Korath had never heard. The tone was calm, but determined. When the translation computer finally processed the message, Thexvar felt a chill run through his body. "This is Captain Hyun-woo of the United Earth ship Iron Dawn. We are here to help the Vellani people. Any Korath ship that attacks civilian targets will be destroyed. You have 1 minute to withdraw from this system." The bridge fell silent. In 30 years of military service, no one had ever spoken to Admiral Thexvar with such casual disregard for the power of the Korath Empire. 10 small ships were threatening nearly 1,000 vessels of the Imperial fleet. "Response, sir," asked his tactical officer. Thexvar straightened to his full height. "All ships, destroy the alien vessels. Show them the price of defying the Empire." The Korath fleet began to move, turning their weapons toward the approaching human ships. But they moved slowly, carefully, maintaining their perfect formations as their military doctrine required. The humans did not maintain formation. As soon as the first Korath ship fired, the human vessels scattered in all directions, accelerating at speeds that should have been impossible for their size. The Iron Dawn rolled inverted and dove under the enemy fleet while firing every weapon it had. The storm chaser spun in a corkscrew pattern that brought it through a gap in the Korath formation that had opened for only seconds. Within minutes, the organized perfection of the Imperial fleet had become chaos. The humans moved like they were flying through an asteroid field during a solar storm, performing maneuvers that made Korath pilots sick just watching them. Admiral Thexvar gripped the railing of his command deck as his flagship shook from nearby explosions. 3 of his ships had already been destroyed, and he couldn't understand how. The alien vessels were too small to carry weapons powerful enough to threaten Korath battlecruisers. "Sir, the aliens are using ramming attacks," his tactical officer shouted over the noise of battle. "They're deliberately colliding with our ships." Thexvar stared at the main screen in horror. He watched as one of the human ships, badly damaged and trailing atmosphere, changed course directly toward a Korath heavy cruiser. The alien vessel struck the cruiser's engine section at full speed, causing both ships to explode in a brilliant flash. No civilized species used ramming attacks. It was suicide. It was insane. It was completely outside every military doctrine in the known galaxy. "All ships, fall back to defensive positions," Thexvar ordered. "Maintain formation and use long-range weapons only." But the humans weren't giving them time to reorganize. They moved through the Korath fleet like predators hunting prey, striking fast and disappearing before return fire could find them. Their tactics made no sense according to any military manual Thexvar had ever studied. On the Iron Dawn, Captain Hyun Woo watched his crew work with deadly. Major Gite checked his assault rifle one more time as the boarding pod prepared to launch from the UES Iron Dawn. Around him, 11 other human Marines adjusted their equipment and ran final systems checks on their armor. They were about to do something that no other species in the galaxy would even consider: board an enemy ship during active combat. 30 seconds to impact, announced Corporal Kyung-soo from the pilot's seat. Target vessel is the Korath command cruiser Void. Hunter. Intelligence says it's coordinating attacks on the civilian shelters down on Vela Prime. Gite nodded. Captain Hyun-woo had made it clear that protecting the Volani civilians was their top priority. If that meant boarding a ship 20 times, larger than their own, then that's what they would do. The human fleet had been fighting for 6 hours now, and the battle was not going according to any military manual ever written. Instead of the organized, formal combat that galactic civilizations preferred, the humans had turned the space around Vela Prime into a chaotic free-for-all that the Korath couldn't adapt to. Admiral Thexvar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching his tactical display with growing horror. The small human fleet had somehow managed to destroy over 200 Korath ships while losing only 3 of their own. It should have been impossible, but the evidence was right there on his sensors. "Sir, the aliens are using tactics we've never encountered," reported his chief tactical officer. "They don't maintain formations. They don't follow engagement protocols. They attack from directions that should be impossible." Thexvar studied the display, trying to understand what was happening. The human ships moved like living creatures rather than military vessels. They seemed to anticipate Korath movements before the orders were even given, striking at weak points that shouldn't have been visible to their sensors. "And they're not trying to capture our ships," continued the tactical officer. "Every attack is designed to cause maximum damage. They're trying to kill us all." This was the most disturbing part. In galactic warfare, the goal was usually to force surrender and capture valuable technology and crew. Complete destruction of enemy forces was considered wasteful and barbaric. But the humans seemed to have no interest in taking prisoners or salvaging technology. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from the human fleet. It's a warning." "Put it through." Captain Hyun-woo's voice filled the bridge, speaking through the translation system with calm certainty. "Admiral Thexvar, this is your final warning. Order your ships to stop bombing civilian targets and withdraw from this system. If you refuse, we will board your command ship and remove you personally." The bridge fell silent. Thexvar felt his blood pressure rise as the implications hit him. The aliens were threatening to board his flagship. The Eternal Dominion was the largest ship in the fleet, protected by thousands of troops and the most advanced security systems in the Empire. "Tactical, how many human ships are targeting us directly?" he asked. "None, sir. Their fleet is scattered across the system, engaging multiple targets." Thexvar allowed himself a moment of relief. Even if the humans were unusually aggressive, they couldn't possibly board his ship while fighting the entire fleet. That's when the proximity alarms started screaming. "Contact, bearing 27 Mark 8, shouted the sensor operator. "Small, craft approaching at high speed." On the main screen, Thexvar could see a tiny vessel racing toward his ship. It was smaller than a Korath shuttle, and it was moving far too fast to be attempting a normal docking procedure. "Is it going to ram us?" he asked. "Negative, sir. It's heading for docking bay 7. Thexvar stared at the screen in disbelief. The humans were actually trying to board his ship during active combat, while their fleet was outnumbered, nearly 100 to 1. It was the most audacious thing he had ever seen. "Security teams to docking base 7, he ordered. "Prepare to repel boarders." The boarding pod struck the Korath docking bay with enough force to crack the reinforced deck plating. As soon as the smoke cleared, Major Gite and his Marines poured out of their damaged craft with weapons ready. The first thing that struck him was the smell. The Korath ship's atmosphere was thinner than Earth normal, with a chemical scent that burned his nose. The gravity was lighter, too, making him feel like he could jump to the ceiling if he wanted to. "Spread out," he ordered through his helmet radio. "Remember, these aliens evolved in low gravity. They're going to be slower and weaker than us." The Marines moved through the docking bay with practiced efficiency, using hand signals and coordinated movement patterns they had learned during training on Earth. They were designed for fighting in the cramped, dangerous environments of asteroid, mines, and space stations. The first Korath security team arrived 3 minutes later, running through the corridors in perfect formation. They carried energy weapons and wore armor that looked impressive, but seemed designed more for ceremony than actual combat. The firefight lasted exactly 47 seconds. The Korath soldiers moved like they were underwater, their reflexes slowed by the heavier gravity the humans had set in the ship's environmental systems. Their energy weapons were powerful, but required time to charge between shots. Their armor protected them from energy attacks, but did nothing against the kinetic projectiles. The humans preferred. Worst of all, they fought like they were on a parade ground instead of in a life-or-death battle. They maintained formation, took cover behind designated positions, and waited for orders from their commander before advancing. The humans fought like they were clearing out a nest of dangerous animals. They moved fast, struck hard, and adapted their tactics every few seconds based on what they observed. When Korath soldiers took cover behind a bulkhead, the humans simply shot through the thin metal walls. When the aliens tried to set up a defensive line, the Marines flanked them through maintenance tunnels that were too small for Korath bodies. "This is insane," gasped the Korath security commander as he retreated toward the bridge. "They're fighting like wild animals. They have no discipline, no strategy." But Major Gite did have a strategy. While half his team engaged the security forces, the other half was moving through the ship's corridors toward the bridge, following blueprints that Lieutenant Dong Min had provided based on captured Korath databases. The aliens had built their ship like a fortress, with multiple defensive positions and choke points designed to stop boarders. But they had designed it to stop boarders who followed civilized rules of warfare. The humans simply blasted through walls, crawled through air ducts, and cut through floors to reach their objective. Admiral Thexvar watched the security feeds in growing panic as the human boarders moved through his ship like a plague. They were smaller than Korath soldiers, but they moved with a speed and ferocity that was terrifying to watch. "Sir, they've reached Deck 15, reported his security chief. "At their current rate of advance, they'll reach the bridge in 12 minutes. Seal all blast doors," Thexvar ordered. "Flood the corridors with poison gas. Do whatever it takes to stop them." But the humans had come prepared for chemical warfare. Their armor was fully sealed, and they carried portable air supplies. When the Korath flooded the corridors with nerve gas, the Marines simply put on additional breathing equipment and continued their advance. When blast doors sealed in front of them, they used explosive charges to blow them open. When security forces tried to ambush them from above, they shot through the ceiling and returned fire before the aliens could react. "Sir," the security chief said quietly, "I don't think we can stop them. They're fighting like nothing we've ever encountered. It's like they're not afraid to die." Thexvar realized with growing horror that the security chief was right. The humans weren't just fearless, they seemed to actually enjoy the combat. He could hear them on the security feeds, calling out to each other with what sounded like laughter, as they fought their way through his ship. On Deck 12, Major Gite paused to reload his weapon and check on his team. They had been fighting for 20 minutes, and every one of his Marines was still operational. The Korath resistance was collapsing faster than he had expected. "Kyung-Soo, how are we doing on time?" he asked. "Captain Hunwoo says the space battle is going well," the corporal replied. "The Korath fleet is starting to break formation. Some ships are trying to retreat." Gite smiled inside his helmet. The plan was working perfectly. While the human fleet kept the enemy distracted with chaotic hit-and-run attacks, his boarding team was cutting the head off the snake by targeting the command structure. "All right, people," he said to his team. "Time to introduce these aliens to human diplomacy." They reached the bridge 6 minutes later. The blast doors were sealed and reinforced, but the humans had brought cutting charges specifically designed for this situation. As the metal began to glow and melt, Gite could hear panicked voices on the other side. The doors fell inward with a crash, and the Marines poured through the opening into the Korath command center. Admiral Thexvar and his bridge crew stared at them in shock, unable to believe that 12 humans had fought their way through an entire battlecruiser. Commander Hanul stood on the bridge of the UES Storm Chaser, studying the holographic display that showed Korath fleet movements throughout the sector. 3 days had passed since the battle at Vela Prime, and word of humanity's victory was spreading through the galaxy faster than the speed of light. Unfortunately, it was also reaching the Korath Empire. Intelligence reports that the Korath are mobilizing their reserve fleets, reported her tactical officer, Lieutenant Chang Ho. They're calling it the largest military operation in their history. Hanul nodded grimly. She had expected this response. The Korath Empire had built its power on the belief that they were superior to all other species. Having a handful of human ships destroy one of their fleets was more than a military defeat. It was a threat to their entire way of thinking. "How long before their reinforcements arrive at Vela Prime?" she asked. "Our best estimate is 4 days," Chang Ho replied. "They're bringing everything they have, over 2,000 ships." The human fleet was now down to 8 operational vessels after the battle. Even with their tactical advantages, fighting 2,000 enemy ships was impossible. But Captain Hyun Woo had anticipated this problem, and he had a solution that the Korath would never see coming. Instead of waiting for the enemy to come to them, the humans were going hunting. "Signal from the Iron Dawn," announced Communications Officer Yu Jin. "Captain Hyun Woo is ready to begin Phase 3 of the operation." Hanul activated her command screen and saw the faces of the other human ship captains appear in separate windows. Captain Woo Jin of the Relentless looked eager for action, while Captain Yuna of the Defiant was reviewing target data on her tactical display. "Ladies and gentlemen," Captain Hyun Woo began, "our Vellani friends have provided us with detailed information about Korath supply lines and communication networks. It's time to show the Empire what happens when you threaten innocent people in front of humans." The plan was elegantly simple. While the Korath gathered their massive fleet for a direct assault on Vela Prime, the human ships would split into 3 hunting groups and attack the Empire's infrastructure. They would target supply convoys, communication relays, fuel depots, and isolated ship groups throughout Korath space. "Remember," Hyun Woo continued, "we're not trying to conquer territory. We're trying to make the Korath Empire collapse from within. Hit them fast, hit them hard, and disappear before they can respond." Hanul's group consisted of the Storm Chaser, the Defiant, and the newly repaired Courage. Their target was a major supply convoy carrying weapons and ammunition to the gathering fleet. Intelligence suggested it would be protected by only 30 Korath vessels. Manageable odds for human tactics. "Yuna, your ship will create the initial distraction," Hanul explained during their pre-mission briefing. "Draw their escort ships away from the convoy. Woo Jin and I will hit the supply vessels while they're chasing you." Captain Yuna smiled on the communication screen. "Understood. How long do you need?" "Give us 10 minutes to destroy the convoy. Then we'll come help you deal with the escorts." It sounded simple, but Hanul knew that space combat was never simple. The Korath might have learned from their defeat at Vela Prime and adapted their tactics. They might have set traps. They might have reinforcements nearby that human intelligence hadn't detected. But that was the beauty of human military thinking. Earth's violent history had taught them to expect the unexpected and adapt to changing circumstances. Other species planned their battles carefully and followed detailed strategies. Humans made plans, then threw them out as soon as the shooting started. 2 days later, the UES Defiant dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Korath supply convoy's route. Captain Yuna immediately detected 32 enemy ships arranged in a defensive formation around 17 massive cargo vessels. The escorts were moving in perfect geometric patterns, just like Korath doctrine required. "All right, people," Yuna announced to her crew. "Time to get their attention." The Defiant accelerated toward the convoy at maximum speed, broadcasting a message on all Korath military frequencies. The translation was simple. "This is Captain Yuna of the United Earthship Defiant. Surrender your convoy immediately, or we will destroy it." The response was immediate and predictable. All 32 escort ships broke formation and began pursuing the single human vessel, leaving the cargo ships protected by only their own defensive systems. Yuna smiled as she watched the enemy formation collapse on her tactical display. The Korath were brave and disciplined, but they thought like a military organization instead of like predators. When faced with a threat, they responded as a group rather than thinking tactically. Engineering, give me everything the engines. Have, she ordered. Navigation, plot a course through the asteroid field at grid reference 77 Alpha. The Defiant raced toward a nearby asteroid belt, with the entire Korath escort force in pursuit. The enemy ships were faster in a straight line, but they couldn't match human maneuvering in a debris field. As soon as the Defiant entered the asteroids, the gap between hunter and prey began to widen. Behind them, the Korath ships struggled to maintain formation while navigating around massive space rocks. Their sensors were designed for open space, combat, not for tracking targets through dense asteroid fields. Several escort ships collided with asteroids or each other as they tried to keep up with the human vessel. Meanwhile, the Storm Chaser and Courage dropped out of hyperspace right next to the now undefended convoy. 17 cargo ships, reported Lieutenant Chang Ho from his position at the tactical station, all of them carrying military supplies for the Korath fleet. Hanul studied the enemy vessels on her screen. They were huge, slow, and built for carrying cargo rather than fighting. Their defensive weapons were minimal, designed mainly to discourage pirates rather than military vessels. Signal the cargo ships, she ordered. Give them 30 seconds to abandon ship, then destroy them all. The Korath cargo ship crews were not soldiers. They were civilians who had been pressed into military service to support the war effort. When 2 human warships appeared next to their convoy and demanded surrender, most of them immediately began launching escape pods. Han Newell watched the evacuation with approval. Humans might be aggressive fighters, but they had no interest in killing non-combatants. Once the cargo ships were empty, however, they became legitimate military targets. All cargo vessels evacuated, reported Chang Ho, ready to begin destruction of enemy supplies. Fire. The destruction of the convoy took less than 5 minutes. Human weapons, designed for asteroid mining, tore through the cargo ships' hulls. Like paper, thousands of tons of weapons, ammunition, food, and fuel that had been destined for the Korath fleet instead became expanding clouds of debris. Hanul to Yuna, Hanul broadcast on the secure channel. Convoy destroyed. How are you doing with the escorts? Having fun, came the reply. They're down to 28 ships, and they're starting to spread out. I think they're finally figuring out that chasing me through an asteroid field isn't working. We're on our way. The Storm Chaser and Courage raced toward the asteroid field, where Yuna was playing cat and mouse with the Korath escort fleet. By the time they arrived, the Defiant had led the enemy ships into a perfect ambush position. The remaining Korath vessels found themselves caught between 3 human ships, in a debris field that favored human tactics. The battle was over in minutes. Some enemy ships tried to surrender, but their communication systems had been damaged in the asteroid field. Others attempted to retreat, but human ships were faster and more maneuverable. When the shooting stopped, 32 Korath escort ships had been reduced to 8 damaged vessels limping away from the battlefield. The humans had not lost a single ship. "One convoy down," Hanul reported to Captain Hyun-woo. "Moving to Target 2. Across Korath space, similar attacks were taking place. Captain Woo Jin's group destroyed a communication relay that coordinated fleet movements across 3 star systems. Captain Hyun-woo personally led an assault on a fuel depot that supplied the Korath home fleet. But the most devastating attack came from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Dong Min, working from his position aboard the Iron Dawn, had been studying captured Korath databases and discovered something remarkable. "Captain," he reported during one of their daily briefings, "I found a weakness in the Korath military structure that we can exploit." "What kind of weakness?" Hyun-woo asked. "Their entire command system depends on constant communication with their homeworld. Every major decision has to be approved by the High Command on Korath Prime. If we could disrupt their communications for even a few hours, their fleet coordination would collapse." Hyun-woo leaned forward in his chair. "What would it take to disrupt their communications?" Dong-min smiled. "Just one human ship with some creative modifications to our jamming equipment." Tactical Officer Kyung-soo looked up from his display. "Sir, I've been analyzing Korath fleet movements since we started our attacks. They're pulling ships from all over the Empire to reinforce their main fleet. Their border defenses are getting weaker every day." Hyun-woo nodded slowly as the pieces of a larger strategy began to form. Supreme Admiral Nexthul stood in the war room of the Korath High Command, staring at the holographic display that showed the current state of the Empire. Red warning lights indicated attacks throughout their territory, while status reports scrolled continuously across multiple screens. In 2 weeks, the unknown aliens had inflicted more damage than the Empire had suffered in 50 years of expansion. "Report!" he commanded, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had never tasted defeat. General Vextar, commander of the Empire's Intelligence Division, stepped forward nervously. "Supreme Admiral, the alien attacks have destroyed 67 supply convoys, 32 communication relays, and 18 fuel depots. They've also eliminated over 400 ships from our patrol fleets." Nexthul was silent for a long moment. He was the largest Korath alive, standing nearly 7 feet tall, with the pale blue skin and dark eyes of his species. His uniform was covered with medals from victories across 3 star systems, and his reputation for ruthless efficiency was known throughout the galaxy. "How many ships are these aliens using for these attacks?" he asked. "Intelligence suggests no more than 8 vessels, possibly fewer," Vextar replied. "They appear to be coordinating their attacks with remarkable precision, but each individual engagement involves only 2 or 3 ships at most." The war room fell silent. Every officer present understood the implications. 8 alien ships were systematically dismantling an empire that controlled hundreds of worlds and commanded thousands of vessels. "What do we know about their technology?" Nexthul asked. "Their ships appear to be primitive by our standards," another officer reported. "Basic hull construction, simple weapons, limited defensive systems. But they're faster and more maneuverable than anything in our fleet. And their tactics..." He paused, searching for words. "Their tactics are completely outside our understanding of military doctrine." Nexthul walked to the main display and studied the attack patterns. The aliens struck without warning, destroyed their targets with brutal efficiency, and disappeared before reinforcements could arrive. They showed no interest in capturing territory or technology. They simply killed everything they encountered and moved on to the next target. "Have any alien ships been captured or destroyed?" he asked. 3 vessels were destroyed in the initial battle at Vela Prime, Vextar reported. "However, we were unable to recover any intact technology or crew members. The aliens seem to prefer death to capture." This was perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the enemy. In galactic warfare, surrender was a normal part of military engagement. Defeated forces were expected to yield to superior numbers and negotiate terms. But these aliens fought to the death in every encounter, often destroying their own ships rather than allow them to be captured. "Supreme Admiral," interrupted the communications officer, We're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Thexvar's fleet. Put it through. Admiral Thexvar's image appeared on the main screen. He looked exhausted and frightened, which was unusual for a Korath military commander. Behind him, the bridge of his flagship showed signs of recent combat damage. Supreme. Admiral, I must report another attack by the alien fleet. They destroyed my entire supply convoy and damaged 6 escort vessels before withdrawing. But there's something else you need to know. Continue. The aliens are communicating with the slave populations on our conquered worlds. They're encouraging rebellion and providing tactical assistance to resistance movements. We've had uprisings on 11 planets in the last week. Nexthal felt a cold sensation in his chest. The Empire's strength was built on the systematic conquest and enslavement of weaker species. If those populations began to rebel simultaneously, supported by alien military assistance, the Empire could collapse from within. How are they coordinating? With the rebels? He asked. We don't know, Thexvar admitted. Our communication intercepts suggest they've made contact with resistance leaders on multiple worlds, but we can't determine how they're transmitting messages across such distances without using our communication networks. On the UES Iron Dawn, tech specialist Su Min worked at her modified communication station, coordinating with resistance movements across Korath space. The solution to long-range communication had been surprisingly simple once she understood how galactic civilizations thought about technology. Most alien species built communication networks like the Internet on Earth, centralized systems that could be monitored and controlled by governments. But humans had also developed peer-to-peer networks, encrypted channels, and guerrilla communication methods during Earth's various conflicts. Signal from the Alterian resistance, she reported to Captain Hyun-woo. They're ready to begin their assault on the orbital defense platforms. They're requesting covering fire from human ships. Hyun-woo studied the tactical display. The Alterian system was 3 days away from their current position, but if the rebels could destroy the Korath orbital defenses, it would open another front in the war. Yuna's group is closest to Alterian space, he said. Signal the Defiant and tell them to provide support. Across the bridge, Lieutenant Dong Min looked up from his xenobiology station. Captain, I've finished my analysis of the captured Korath soldiers from our boarding action. I think I've found something important. What is it? The Korath have a fundamental weakness in their biology that we can exploit. They evolved on a low-gravity world with a thin atmosphere, which means their cardiovascular system is much weaker than ours. High-stress combat situations actually cause them physical damage. Chief Medical Officer Boram leaned forward with interest. What kind of damage? Their equivalent of adrenaline is actually toxic to their nervous system in large doses, Dong Min explained. Prolonged combat stress can cause paralysis, organ failure, and death. It's why they prefer formal, organized warfare. Their bodies literally can't handle the chaos of human-style combat. Hyun-woo felt a grim smile cross his face. So every time we force them into chaotic battle situations, we're not just defeating them tactically, we're actually poisoning them. Exactly, and there's more. I've been studying their communication intercepts, and I think I understand their social structure. The Korath Empire isn't just a military organization. It's a rigid caste system where every individual has a specific role and position. When we disrupt their command structure, we're not just interfering with their military effectiveness. We're attacking the foundation of their entire society. This explained why the Korath were having so much trouble adapting to human tactics. Their entire civilization was built around order, hierarchy, and predictable behavior. The chaotic, adaptive nature of human warfare was literally incomprehensible to them. Sumin, how many worlds are currently in rebellion against the Korath? Hyunwoo asked. 17 confirmed. With more joining every day, she replied. The rebels are using human tactical advice to coordinate their attacks. They're targeting communication networks, supply depots, and administrative centers just like we taught them. On the main screen, the holographic display showed the current state of Korath space. Red indicators marked worlds in rebellion, while yellow warnings showed systems where uprisings were expected soon. The neat, organized borders of the Empire were dissolving into chaos. Sir, reported Navigator Minho, long-range sensors are detecting massive fleet movements throughout Korath space. They're pulling ships from every system and concentrating them in 3 main groups. Hyunwoo studied the movement patterns. They're trying to consolidate their forces and crush the rebellions by overwhelming force. That's what it looks like, Minho agreed. But it means they're leaving most of their territory practically undefended. Chief Petty Officer Taeho looked up from his pilot station. Captain, if they're concentrating their fleets, doesn't that make them more dangerous? 3,000 ships in one place could overwhelm even our tactics. Hyunwoo nodded. That's exactly what they're hoping, but they're thinking like the Korath Empire instead of like humans. They see 3 concentrated fleets as 3 indestructible forces. We see 3 targets. Communications Officer Hai-Jin suddenly straightened at her station. Captain, priority message from Earth Fleet Command. It's Admiral Chen. The main screen changed to show Admiral Chen, commander of Earth's entire space fleet, speaking from his office on Luna Base. Behind him, Hyunwoo could see the curve of Earth through the window. Captain Hyunwoo, I've been following your situation through the deep space communication relays. The Earth government has voted to provide you with full support for your operations against the Korath Empire. Hyunwoo felt a surge of pride and relief. Thank you, Admiral. What kind of support? We're sending you our entire deep space fleet, 30 ships with full military modifications and marine complements. They should reach your position in 6 days. The bridge erupted in quiet cheers. 30 additional ships would more than triple their effective force, giving them the ability to take on larger enemy formations. There's more, Admiral Chen continued. Earth intelligence has been in contact with several other alien species that have conflicts with the Korath Empire. The Zentari Confederacy and the Free Worlds Alliance have agreed to provide military assistance if you can prove that the Captain Hyunwoo stood on the bridge of the UES Iron Dawn, watching the massive Korath fleet approach through the viewport. 3 days had passed since Earth's reinforcements had arrived, and now 38 human ships faced off against nearly 1,500 enemy vessels in the Nexus system. It was the largest space battle in galactic history, and it would determine the fate of the Korath Empire. Enemy fleet is maintaining standard formation, reported Tactical Officer Kyung-soo. They're approaching in 3 waves with heavy battleships in the center and lighter vessels protecting the flanks. Hyunwoo nodded. The Korath were following their military doctrine exactly as expected. They believed that superior numbers and firepower would overwhelm the human fleet, and they were probably right according to traditional military thinking. But humans didn't follow traditional military thinking. Signal from Admiral Kim on the UES Indomitable, announced Communications Officer Hai-Jin. Earth reinforcements are in position and ready to engage. Admiral Kim was Earth's most experienced combat commander, a veteran of the Sol system conflicts, who had volunteered to lead the reinforcement fleet personally. Her ships were purpose-built warships rather than converted cargo haulers, equipped with the latest weapons and defensive systems that Earth technology could provide. All ships, this is Captain Hyunwoo, he broadcast on the Fleet Command channel. Remember what we've learned about fighting the Korath. They expect us to engage in formal combat with organized formations and predictable tactics. Instead, we're going to show them what happens when Deathworld predators go hunting. On the Korath flagship Eternal Supremacy, Supreme Admiral Nex Thul watched the human fleet with growing confidence. The alien ships were arranged in a loose formation that looked almost casual compared to the precise geometry of the Imperial fleet. Many of them appeared to be damaged from previous battles, with hull breaches sealed by temporary patches and weapon systems that looked jury-rigged rather than properly installed. "Admiral," reported his tactical officer, "the alien fleet is significantly smaller than our intelligence estimates suggested. We count 38 vessels against our force of 1,473 ships." Nexthul allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. The mysterious aliens had caused considerable damage throughout the Empire, but they had finally made the mistake of facing the Imperial Navy in open battle. No force in galactic history had ever survived against such overwhelming odds. "Begin." "The attack," he ordered. "Standard engagement protocol. Advance in formation and destroy all alien vessels." The Korath fleet began its approach with the mechanical precision that had conquered 3 star systems. Each ship knew its exact position and role in the battle plan. Gun crews prepared their weapons according to carefully rehearsed procedures. Communications officers maintained constant contact with the command structure to ensure perfect coordination. It was everything that galactic military doctrine said a space fleet should be, and it was exactly what the humans had been hoping for. "Here they come," observed Commander Jinnah from her position at the navigation station. "Just like we predicted." "All ships execute Maneuver Alpha," Hyunwoo ordered. The human fleet suddenly scattered in all directions like a school of fish, startled by a predator. Ships accelerated at speeds that should have been impossible for their size, pulling G-forces that would have killed most alien crews. The careful formations that the Korath had planned their attack around disappeared. In seconds. "What are they doing?" demanded Nexthul as he watched the alien fleet break apart on his tactical display. "Are they retreating?" "No, sir," replied his sensor operator. They're surrounding us." This was impossible according to every military manual ever written. A smaller force could not surround a larger one without being destroyed. But the humans were moving so fast and in such unpredictable patterns that the Korath targeting systems couldn't lock onto them. "All ships, maintain formation and concentrate fire on the nearest targets," Nexthul ordered. But there were no nearest targets. The human ships were everywhere and nowhere, appearing out of nowhere to strike at weak points in the Korath formation before disappearing again. They used the massive size of the Imperial fleet against itself, hiding behind enemy ships and using the Korath's own vessels as cover. On the UES Storm Chaser, Commander Hanul laughed with pure joy as she piloted her ship through a gap between 2 Korath battlecruisers, firing at both of them before they could react. This was what her ship had been designed for: high-speed maneuvering in dangerous environments. "Target the command bridges," she ordered her weapons officer. "Remember, we're not trying to destroy these ships. We're trying to panic their crews." This was the key insight that humans had developed about Korath psychology. The aliens could handle organized combat where everyone knew their role and followed orders. But they couldn't cope with chaos and unpredictability. Every time a human ship appeared where it shouldn't be and did something unexpected, it caused stress reactions throughout the enemy fleet. "Hanul to all ships," she broadcast. "Time for Phase 2. Let's show them what Deathworld engineering looks like." Throughout the human fleet, damage control teams began implementing modifications that would have horrified any safety inspector in the galaxy. When the UES Defiant lost its primary weapon array to enemy fire, Captain Yuna ordered her crew to reroute power from life support and use the damaged systems as improvised plasma cannons. When the UES Relentless suffered a hull breach that exposed half the ship to space, Captain Woojin had his crew weld additional weapons to the exposed framework and use the open sections as firing positions. Most shocking of all, when the UES Courage lost its engines to a direct hit, the crew rigged the ship's reactor to overload and flew it directly into a Korath battleship in a kamikaze attack that destroyed both vessels. "They're insane," whispered the Korath tactical officer as he watched the human ships continue fighting with damage that should have forced them to surrender. "They're fighting with ships that should be dead in space." Nexthul stared at the battle display in growing horror. The human fleet was losing ships, but the survivors were becoming more dangerous rather than less effective. It was as if damage and casualties made them angry instead of demoralized. "Sir," reported his communications officer, "we're receiving audio transmissions from the human ships. They appear to be singing." "Singing?" "Yes, sir. Military songs, I think. Our translation computers are having difficulty with some of the terms, but they seem to be about fighting and dying gloriously in battle." Nexthul felt his blood pressure rise as he realized what was happening. The humans weren't just fighting for military objectives. They were enjoying the combat. They found joy in violence and chaos that would terrify any civilized species. On the UES Iron Dawn, Weapons Officer Chang Ho grinned as he fired the ship's mining lasers at a Korath cruiser. The weapons hadn't been designed for space combat, but they were cutting through enemy armor like it was made of paper. "Chang Ho," called Chief Engineer So Young from her position at the damage control station. "I've got an idea for increasing our firepower, but it's going to require shutting down artificial gravity and life support on decks 7 through 12. "Do it," Chang Ho replied without hesitation. "We can hold our breath." This was the fundamental difference between human and alien approaches to warfare. Other species built ships with safety margins and backup systems to protect their crews. Humans built ships that could be pushed beyond their design limits when the situation required it. When the Iron Dawn lost half its defensive screens to enemy fire, the crew simply rerouted power from non-essential systems and kept fighting. When the main computer was damaged by an overload, Lieutenant Dong Min bypassed it entirely and began calculating firing solutions manually. "Sir," reported Navigator Min Ho as the ship shuddered from another impact, "we've lost main engines. Switching to auxiliary power." "How fast can we go on auxiliary?" Hyunwoo asked. "Maybe 60% of normal speed." "That's fast enough," Hyunwoo decided. "Ye-jin, signal the fleet. Tell them we're still operational and moving to support the Indomitable." Admiral Kim's flagship was taking heavy fire from 3 Korath battleships, but she was giving as good as she got. The Indomitable was the most advanced warship Earth had ever built, and she was proving that human military engineering could match anything the galaxy had to offer. "This is Admiral Kim to all ships." Her voice came through the communication system. "I'm seeing some beautiful flying out there. Let's finish this." The tide of battle was turning. Despite being outnumbered nearly 40-1, the human fleet was systematically destroying Korath ships while suffering relatively light casualties. The aliens' perfect formations had become death traps as human ships struck from unexpected directions and disappeared before return fire could find them. But the most devastating blow came when Supreme Admiral Nexthul himself made a fatal mistake. Frustrated by his inability to destroy the human fleet, he ordered his flagship to ram the Iron Dawn, believing that his massive battleship could destroy the smaller human vessel through sheer mass. Captain Hyun-woo watched the enormous enemy ship approaching and smiled coldly. "All hands, prepare for collision. Ramming charges ready." Admiral Kim floated in the emergency command pod of her destroyed flagship, the UES Indomitable, watching through the transparent aluminum viewport as the Korath Grand Fleet approached. 2 days had passed since the Battle of Nexus, and the enemy had responded with overwhelming force. Nearly 3,000 ships now advanced toward the human position, led by the massive super battleship Divine Retribution. "Status report," she requested through her emergency communicator. Captain Yuna's voice crackled through the damaged communication system from the UES Defiant. "We have 19 operational ships remaining, Admiral. The Korath are broadcasting surrender demands on all frequencies." Kim studied the approaching enemy formation through her tactical scanner. The Korath had learned from their previous defeats and were approaching much more carefully this time. Their ships moved in tight defensive formations with overlapping fields of fire, and they maintained careful spacing to prevent human ships from using their ramming tactics. But Supreme Admiral Nexthul had made one crucial mistake. In his message demanding human surrender, he had threatened to use planet-killer weapons against Vela Prime and every other world that had rebelled against the Empire. He believed this would force the humans to submit rather than watch innocent civilizations die. He had badly misunderstood human psychology. "This is Admiral Kim to all ships," she broadcast. "You heard the Korath ultimatum. They want to use planet killers against civilian populations. I think we all know what our response to that is going to be." Throughout the human fleet, crews began preparing for what Communications Officer Hae-jin was already calling the final hunt. Every human ship that could still move began accelerating toward the massive enemy formation, abandoning all defensive tactics in favor of pure, devastating aggression. On the UES Storm Chaser, Commander Han-Nul checked her ship's condition one last time. They had lost main engines, most of their weapons, and half their crew. The hull was held together with emergency patches and determination. By any reasonable standard, the ship should have been abandoned hours ago. "Engineering. How long can we maintain current acceleration?" she asked. Chief Engineer Taemin's voice came through the intercom from the engine room. "Maybe 20 minutes before the reactor goes critical, but I can give you everything the engines have for 15 minutes. If you want, do it," Han-Nul decided. "Navigation. Plot an intercept course for their command ship. We're going to show these aliens what happens when you threaten children in front of humans." Similar conversations were taking place throughout the human fleet. Captain Woo Jin was jury-rigging his ship's mining charges into improvised nuclear mines. Captain Dong Hyun was rerouting power from life support to weapon systems that were already operating beyond safe limits. Captain Bo-Ra was preparing her crew for a boarding action against a ship 50 times larger than their own. On the Korath super battleship Divine Retribution, Fleet Admiral Kexthon watched the human approach with growing confusion. Instead of retreating or attempting to negotiate, the damaged alien ships were accelerating directly toward his massive fleet in what could only be described as a suicide charge. "Admiral," reported his tactical officer, "the human vessels are moving at maximum acceleration. At their current rate, they'll reach our outer perimeter in 18 minutes. Kexthon studied the tactical display with the cold calculation that had made him the Empire's most successful commander. 19 small ships against 3,000 Imperial vessels. The outcome should be mathematically certain. "All ships, prepare to receive the enemy attack," he ordered. "Concentrate fire on the lead vessels. Destroy them before they can reach our formation." The Korath fleet opened fire with everything they had. Thousands of energy beams and plasma missiles reached out across space toward the approaching human ships. It should have been the end of the human fleet, but the aliens continued their advance through the storm of enemy fire with a disregard for their own safety that was terrifying to witness. The UES Relentless took a direct hit from a plasma cannon that would have vaporized a normal ship. Instead, Captain Wu Jin's crew simply sealed the damaged sections and kept flying. When their weapons were destroyed, they used the ship's industrial equipment as improvised armaments. When their shields failed, they used the hull itself as armor. "They're not stopping," whispered the Korath sensor operator as he watched the human ships continue their approach despite taking devastating damage. "They're flying ships that should be dead in space." Admiral Kexthon felt a chill of fear as he began to understand what he was facing. These aliens didn't fight like any military force he had ever encountered. They fought like predators protecting their territory, and they were willing to die rather than allow harm to come to those they protected. "All ships intensify fire," he ordered. "Stop them before they reach our lines." But it was too late. The human fleet had closed to point-blank range, and now their true strategy became apparent. Instead of trying to fight the entire Korath fleet, they were targeting the command ships and support vessels that held the enemy formation together. The UES Storm Chaser, her hull glowing from atmospheric friction and battle damage, crashed directly into the Divine Retribution's command tower. Commander Hanul and her crew died in the impact, but their sacrifice disabled the super battleship's main communication array and left the Korath fleet temporarily without central coordination. The UES, Defiant, used her remaining nuclear charges to destroy a massive carrier that housed 300 fighter craft. Captain Yuna's final transmission was heard across the fleet. For Earth and her children, Captain Dong Hyun's ship, the UES Valiant, had lost everything except engines and one working weapon. He flew directly at a Korath battlecruiser while broadcasting human war songs on all frequencies. The psychological impact on the enemy crew was devastating. They watched in horror as the damaged alien ship approached while its crew sang about dying gloriously in battle. But the most shocking moment came when Chief Medical Officer Boram led a boarding party from the crippled UES Mercy onto a Korath supply ship. Her team had no weapons except medical instruments, but they systematically disabled the enemy vessel's life support systems while the alien crew fled in panic. Throughout the battle, the humans demonstrated a complete disregard for their own safety that was outside the experience of any galactic civilization. They used damaged ships as weapons, converted medical supplies into explosives, and turned evacuation procedures into boarding actions. "They're laughing," reported the Divine Retribution's communications officer in a voice filled with terror. "We're intercepting their internal communications, and they're laughing while they die." Admiral Kexthon stared at the tactical display as his perfectly organized fleet dissolved into chaos. The humans had somehow turned a hopeless last stand into a devastating assault that was tearing his formation apart from within. "Sir," his tactical officer called out, "we're detecting massive hyperspace signatures. Multiple fleets approaching from all directions." Kexthon's blood pressure spiked as new contacts appeared on his sensors. The Zentari Confederacy had arrived with 200 ships. The Free Worlds Alliance brought 300 vessels. Even the mysterious Void Dwellers had sent a fleet to join the battle against the Korath Empire. But most shocking of all was the appearance of Earth's main battle fleet, over 100 human warships led by the massive dreadnought UES Vengeance. Admiral Chen's voice filled the communication channels as the Earth fleet deployed for battle. "This is Admiral Chen of the United Earth Fleet. Any Korath ship that does not immediately surrender will be destroyed. You have 30 seconds to comply." The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. The Korath had come to destroy a handful of human ships and instead found themselves facing a coalition of multiple species led by a military force unlike anything in their experience. "Admiral," the Divine Retribution's captain said quietly, "recommend immediate withdrawal. We cannot win this engagement." Kexthon looked around his command bridge at the faces of his officers. He could see fear in their eyes, not fear of death, but fear of the aliens who sang while they died and turned their own destruction into weapons. "All ships, begin withdrawal," he ordered reluctantly. "Maintain defensive formations and—" His words were cut off as the UES Vengeance opened fire with weapons that defied galactic understanding. The massive human dreadnought carried mining lasers that had been scaled up to capital ship size, plasma cannons that fired superheated stellar matter, and kinetic projectiles that moved at significant fractions of light speed. The Divine Retribution's shields collapsed under the first salvo. The second salvo punched through the super battleship's armor like it was made of paper. The third salvo detonated the ship's main reactor and sent Admiral Kexthon and his entire command staff into the void. Across the battlefield, the Korath fleet was dying. The arrival of the coalition forces had turned a difficult battle into a massacre. Zentari fighters swarmed through the enemy formation like angry insects. Free World's Alliance cruisers picked off isolated Korath ships with precise, devastating fire. The mysterious Void Dwellers used weapons that seemed to bend space itself. Ambassador Unji stood in the Great Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council, looking out at representatives from over 200 different species. 6 months had passed since the destruction of the Korath Empire, and the galaxy was still trying to understand what humanity's emergence meant for the future of interstellar civilization. The hall itself was an impressive structure, built to accommodate the wildly different environmental needs of the galaxy's various species. Some representatives floated in tanks of liquid methane. Others sat in high-pressure chambers, and a few existed as pure energy beings that communicated through controlled electromagnetic pulses. But despite their physical differences, all of them had one thing in common: they were afraid of the humans. "The floor recognizes Ambassador Yunji of the United Earth Federation," announced the Council's presiding officer, a crystalline being whose species had been mediating galactic disputes for thousands of years. Yunji stood and activated the translation matrix that would broadcast her words to every species in the galaxy. She was a small woman by human standards, barely 5 feet tall, but she carried herself with the quiet confidence that came from representing a species that had just defeated the largest military force in galactic history. "Honored representatives," she began, "I come before you today not as a conqueror, but as a friend. Earth's children seek only peace and cooperation with all civilized species." A ripple of skeptical murmurs ran through the assembly. The Altarian ambassador, whose species had been liberated from Korath slavery by human intervention, spoke up first. "With respect, Ambassador Yunji, your species has demonstrated military capabilities that exceed anything we have encountered in recorded history. The battle reports from the Korath conflict describe tactics and weapons that we believe to be impossible." Yunji nodded calmly. She had expected this concern. It is true that humanity fights differently than other species. This is because we evolved on what your scientists classify as a Class 12 death world. Our planet taught us to survive in environments that would be fatal to most galactic civilizations. And that makes you dangerous to us, interrupted the Vegan. Confederacy's representative, a tall, thin being with translucent skin. Your ships can withstand damage that would destroy our vessels. Your crews can function in conditions that would kill our people. How do we know you won't turn these advantages against us? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Yunji looked around the assembly hall, meeting the eyes of representatives whose species spanned the galaxy. Some looked curious, others appeared frightened, and a few seemed actively hostile. Because, she said simply, we have no interest in ruling over others. We came to this region of space to trade and explore. We became involved in the Korath conflict because they were committing genocide against innocent people. Everything we have done since then has been in defense of those who cannot defend themselves. The Zentari ambassador, whose fleet had fought alongside the humans, stood to speak. The human claim is supported by their actions. When they destroyed the Korath Empire, they could have claimed its territory and enslaved its people. Instead, they helped establish democratic governments on the liberated worlds and then withdrew their forces. This was true, but it only seemed to make some representatives more nervous. The hegemony of worlds had built their own empire through conquest and enslavement, and they clearly saw humanity as a potential threat to their power structure. What assurances can you give us that Earth will not become the next galactic empire? Demanded their representative, a massive creature covered in natural armor plating. Yunji smiled. I can give you the best assurance possible. We don't want to be an empire. Ruling over other species would require us to maintain massive military forces across hundreds of worlds, suppress local cultures, and constantly fight rebellions. That sounds exhausting and expensive. A few representatives actually laughed at this practical assessment. The human approach to galactic politics was refreshingly direct compared to the complex diplomatic maneuvering that usually characterized council sessions. But what do you want? Asked the Trade Federation's spokesperson. Every species seeks something. The Korath wanted slaves and territory. The hegemony wants resources and tribute. What does Earth desire? Yunji considered the question carefully. It was the most important thing she would say during her entire time as Earth's ambassador, and it would define humanity's relationship with the galaxy for generations to come. We want to explore, she said finally. We want to learn. We want to trade and make friends. And when someone calls for help, we want to be able to answer. The simple honesty of the statement seemed to catch many representatives off guard. They had expected demands for territory, trade concessions, or political influence. Instead, the humans were asking for the right to continue doing exactly what they were already doing. And if we refuse to accept your presence in our territory, asked the Isolation Coalition's representative. Then we won't enter your territory, Yunji replied. We respect the sovereignty of all civilized species, but we also reserve the right to respond if any government commits genocide or enslaves innocent populations. This statement caused an immediate uproar in the assembly hall. Several representatives began speaking at once, arguing about the implications of allowing any single species to act as galactic police. The crystalline presiding officer restored order with a harmonic tone that resonated through the hall's translation. Systems. The Council recognizes that this is a complex issue requiring careful consideration. We propose a formal vote on humanity's application for membership in the Galactic Council. Over the next 3 hours, representatives debated humanity's place in galactic civilization. Some argued that Earth's military power made them too dangerous to accept. Others pointed out that human intervention had already freed dozens of worlds from oppression and slavery. In the end, the vote was closer than Yunji had hoped, but decisive enough to establish humanity's legitimacy. 137 species voted to accept Earth as a member of the Galactic Council, while 68 voted against. The remaining species abstained, choosing to wait and see how events developed. "The motion carries," announced the presiding officer. "Earth is hereby recognized as a sovereign member of the Galactic Council, with all rights and responsibilities thereof." As the session ended and representatives began to leave the hall, several ambassadors approached Yunji with private concerns and requests. The pattern was becoming familiar. Species that had conflicts with aggressive neighbors wanted to know if they could count on human support. "Ambassador," said the representative from the Rim colonies, a loose alliance of frontier worlds, "we've been having problems with pirates from the Skull Nebula. They've been raiding our supply convoys and taking our people as slaves. The local governments can't stop them." Yunji nodded sympathetically. "Send us the details. If the situation is as you describe, Earth will be happy to provide assistance." Similar conversations took place with representatives from a dozen other species. Word of humanity's willingness to help had spread throughout the galaxy, and every oppressed population was hoping that Earth's children would come to their aid. 2 days later, Yunji was back aboard the UES Diplomat, humanity's first purpose-built diplomatic vessel, when communications officer Park Soo-jin approached her with a message. "Ambassador, we're receiving a distress call from the Altrian system. It appears to be coming from a species we haven't encountered before." Yunji studied the preliminary translation of the message. It was similar to the original Vellani distress call that had started this entire chain of events. A desperate plea for help from a peaceful civilization under attack by aggressive neighbors. "Set course for the Altrian system," she ordered, "and signal Earth Fleet Command. Tell them we may need military support." As the diplomat entered hyperspace, Yunji reflected on how much had changed since Captain Hyun-woo had first heard the Vellani cry for help. Humanity had gone from being unknown aliens flying cargo ships to being recognized as the galaxy's unofficial protectors. It was a responsibility that came with considerable risks, but it was also an opportunity to make the galaxy a better place for everyone. 3 hours later, the diplomat dropped out of hyperspace to find a familiar situation. A peaceful alien world under siege by a more aggressive species. But this time, the attackers withdrew as soon as they detected the human ship's arrival. Word had spread throughout the galaxy. When Earth's children arrived, the fighting stopped, and the bullies went home. As the grateful aliens welcomed their unexpected rescuers, Communications Officer Park received another distress call, this one from a system on the far side of the galaxy. Then another, and another. "Ambassador," Park reported, "we're receiving distress calls from 17 different systems. It looks like news of our willingness to help has spread faster than we expected." Yunji smiled. Captain Hyun-woo would have been proud. His decision to answer a single cry for help had led to humanity becoming the galaxy's champions of justice. "Signal Earth Fleet Command," she ordered. "Tell them to prepare additional ships for humanitarian missions, and send a message to the